My name is Augustus Norton. I'm a faculty member here at Boston University in the Department of Anthropology and the Department of International Relations. Welcome to the 17th Annual Campagna-Kerven Lecture on Modern Turkey. And for those of you who've been to the lecture before, welcome back. And for those of you coming for the first time, welcome, and we hope to see you again many times in the future. Details on the background of the lecture are available on display boards in the main hall of the building. But let me just say that the lecture honors two gentlemen who had significant connections with Turkey and great affection for Turkey. One was one of the original Young Turks, a man who was very much involved in the Young Turks revolt of 1908, that among other things forced or persuaded Sultan Abdülhamid to restore the constitution in the Ottoman Empire. In many ways a precursor to some of the sort of Arab Spring events we've seen this past couple of years in the Middle East. He was a modern man, beginning his life late in the 19th century, but he was a modern man, very much a man of the 20th century, very much committed to what became the sort of secular ideals of the Republic of Turkey. And he had very modern ideas about the role of men and women in society. He was a significant proponent of women's rights in Turkey and served in a number of different roles. He was an associate of Ataturk and a close ally of İsmet İnönü. And he finally left us in the 1970s, in 1977, if I remember correctly. The other gentleman who is the namesake for the lecture series, Gerard Campagna, who earned his PhD right here at Boston University. He wrote his PhD dissertation on the foreign policy of Turkey, and then went to Washington, where for many years he was a leading analyst of Turkish politics and society. The lecture series was launched by his daughter, Suzanne Campagna, who grew up significantly in Turkey, but especially in France, and moved to the U.S. many years ago with her husband, Gerard Campagna, and has been a resident of Washington, D.C. ever since. And it was her inspiration that really gave life to this lecture series and some associated programs. And indeed, when we began the program, there really wasn't much of a focus on modern Turkey in the curriculum of Boston University, and that's very much changed, in part thanks to the lecture series. And Mrs. Campagna is accompanied by her niece, and actually the niece of Gerard Campagna, who's traveled all the way from San Diego to be here with us today. So I'd like to take a moment before I introduce the speaker to honor Suzanne Campagna and to welcome Louisa Campagna for their role in this lecture series. Thank you, Suzanne. She's hating me for doing that, but it needed to be said. Thank you very much, Suzanne. She's a very humble lady. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce my colleague, visiting professor in the Department of International Relations, Stephen Kinzer, to deliver the 17th Campagna-Kerven Lecture on Modern Turkey. He's a young man, but he has already had an extraordinary career. During the 1980s, he covered revolution and social upheaval in Central America. After that, he moved to Europe, learned German, and became the bureau chief for the New York Times, covering the momentous events in Europe. The Annus Mirabilis, as you remember, was 1989, and the sort of unfolding of the disestablishment of the Soviet Empire. These were phenomena he was there to observe and to report on. Later in the decade, he moved to another very interesting locale, Istanbul. In 1996, he began his work in Istanbul and stayed there as the New York Times bureau chief until the year 2000. And this was a period when many of the politicians who are now shaping Turkish politics were beginning to find their footing. And this was the period when significant changes really were beginning, not just in Turkish politics, but in Turkish society. His beat, so to speak, has not only included Central America, Turkey, Eastern and Central Europe, but includes Africa as well, where he covered Rwanda's recovery from genocide and chronicled that in his book, A Thousand Hills. He has a deep interest in U.S. intervention in places like Central America and in Iran. And he's now hard at work on a new book on the Dulles boys, the brothers Alan and John Foster Dulles, who were giant figures, as you know, in Cold War America, particularly in the 1950s. There were also figures of enormous interest, and I'm very much looking forward to that book. He's really been a prolific author. His other books include Bitter Fruit, the story of the American coup in Guatemala in the 1950s, Crescent and Star, a first-rate introduction to Turkey, published in 2001. That book was described by my colleague, Ira Lapidus, as, quote, lyrical, even romantic. It was about a book about the potential of a forceful, creative, and mostly free people to realize their own implied glorious future. That was from the New York Times Book Review. He's published a widely well-regarded book on the American coup, or the American engineered coup in Iran in the early 1950s, All the Shah's Men. He's written a book about America's role in overthrowing governments called Overthrow, subtitle, America's Century of Regime Change from Hawaii to Iraq. And I mentioned A Thousand Hills already. And most recently, he's published Reset, looking at Iran, Turkey, and America's future, a book in which he describes a future in which the logical partnership is one entailing a trio of relations between the U.S., Turkey, and Iran. The title of his lecture today is Democracy, Islam, and Global Ambition, Turkey in the 21st Century. And it now gives me great pleasure to turn the podium over to Stephen Kinzer.
Thanks so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I've been introduced as a young man many times, but not any time recently. I actually was a student here. I can remember sitting in the office up on the second floor in that building across the street, waiting to see Howard Zinn with 50 other students crowding around outside. So I'm kind of closing the circle coming back here. And it's truly an honor to be here in the room with someone who, as a small child, saw such figures as Ismet Inonu and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk pass through the living room. You don't get that too often, so it's really a thrill. And it's an honor to be a part of this lecture series that has brought so much interest in Turkey to this campus. As Professor Norton said, I did live in Turkey for a number of years at a time when interest in Turkey was not as high as it is now. Being a highly experienced and trenchantly insightful correspondent, I can still remember leaving my first interview with Mayor Tayyip Erdogan and thinking to myself, I think he'll be a good mayor, but that's it. He just doesn't have the scope to be an international figure. So that was not the first or last mistake I've made, but I did have a chance to get to know some of these people at an earlier stage. I had an informer who was a member of parliament inside the bloc that Erdogan belonged to, and that was a figure who always wanted to get his side of the story out without being identified. And that guy's now the president of Turkey, Abdullah Gül. So it was a great time to get in on the ground floor of a generational and political change that has not only reshaped Turkey, but through Turkey is reshaping the world. I'm sometimes willing to say, and I guess people can have their own opinions on this, Turkey really is arguably the most fascinating country in the world. It has such a combination of cultures and history. There have been something like 40 civilizations on that piece of geography, even before the Turks got there. And now, Turkey has added yet another layer that makes it even more interesting than it ever was. During the time that I was living there in the 1990s, Turkey was already a wonderful, fascinating place, but it wasn't playing a role in the world. It was not a significant power. Now it is a more than significant power. It is a big regional power with global ambitions. And those ambitions are not unrealistic. We are now seeing in Turkey a transition that we don't get to see very often in the world. And that is a relatively insignificant country that's off in the corner and doesn't count, emerging as a big power. This is a transition that happens infrequently in the world. It's difficult to make this transition. Exercising power and maintaining power is not as difficult as expanding from not having it to having a lot of it. That's the process that Turkey is going through now. And that's what makes it such an interesting place, particularly given everything that's going on in the neighborhood. Strategic relationships don't change as fast as strategic environments. The environment began changing in that part of the world with the end of the Cold War. But only years later did the reconstruction of relationships in that part of the world and the reconfiguring of Turkey begin. Let me talk a little bit about where we were in the past, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about where I think we are now, and then we can conclude with a few ideas about where Turkey might be going. To me, the main fact of Turkish life during the Cold War was not the obvious strategic one that you would hear in the NATO headquarters. That was that Turkey was one of the key frontline countries in the Cold War. Arguably, along with West Germany, it was the most important in that long string of allies that connected all the way from Pakistan to Norway as we were trying to seal off the border with the Soviet Union. Perhaps other than West Germany, there wasn't any country more important than Turkey. But outside the NATO headquarters, nobody ever said anything about how important Turkey was. The real fact of Turkish life during that period was that Turkey was way off on the edge of the world and distant from everything important. Perhaps people, for those couple of generations, didn't have the historical background to realize it, but that was an anomaly in history. If you go back and trace the history of that piece of geography, Anatolia, you can go all the way back to the Trojan War and see that it has always been at the center of the world. When you control those two straits, you have the keys to two worlds. The entire Slavic and Russian world to the north, and the Mediterranean and Southern Europe and North Africa to the south. I actually think that probably is why the Trojan War was fought, not for the reason that we read about in those great Greek epics. If you take the Gallipoli battle, which was fought just a couple of miles from where the Trojan War was fought, some thousands of years later, it was fought for the same reason, for control of those straits and everything that they represented. The strategic logic that gave Turkey its place in the world dissolved almost overnight in 1991 with the end of the Cold War. Suddenly, Turkey didn't seem necessary anymore. But then, here we had this process of strategic realignments taking more time to develop than the environment change took. What happened was that as the artificial division of the world that was enforced by the Cold War faded away, Turkey reemerged to take the logical position that has always been the birthright of whatever civilization is sitting on Anatolia. So Turkey is now emerging to play a role that it might have played at earlier times, but because of the Cold War and for a series of other reasons, it never played and never really wanted to play. This has been a dramatic change. Now, while I was living in Turkey in the 1990s, I saw a fascinating phenomenon unfolding, and it is the phenomena that brought this current, so different regime to power in Turkey. As many of you know, hundreds of thousands of Turks went off to work in Germany as Gastarbeiters during the 1960s and 70s. Most of them maintained contact with their homeland. They were coming back and forth all the time. Many then moved home. And these were a kind of people that Turkey had never known. First of all, they were entrepreneurial. The world had never known Turkish business people before. In the Ottoman period, the businessmen were not Turks. They were people from other minorities. Turks had other roles. So the idea of Turkish entrepreneurs was something new. And we had an inflow of literally hundreds of thousands of people who learned from years and years of living in Europe how to do business. And they began to get ideas about businesses they could do. I've got something in Turkey that Europe would want, or I see something in Europe that I could take back and sell in Turkey. So you had the emergence of this entrepreneurial class. But besides being entrepreneurial, this class had something else that was unusual, and that is they were pious Muslims. They were not like the so-called white Turks who ran the giant family conglomerates based in Istanbul. In fact, they were based out in the provinces, in towns that most people in Istanbul never even visited or could hardly find on a map. So an entire new class began to rise. And during the 1990s, I could see this in Kayseri and Konya and Gaziantep, places that were sleepy backwaters forever, suddenly emerging as dynamic centers of economic growth. People who previously would have wanted to move to Istanbul to get a job and make money realized they didn't have to do that anymore. There were a dozen other cities they could go to. So this explosion of economic potential really transformed Turkey, and as was perfectly predictable, the class that achieved economic power then decided it wanted to take the next step and achieve political power. It was that class that essentially was behind the AKP, the current governing party in Turkey. And that's how you get this phenomenon, unique in the world, of a party with its roots in Islamic politics that is also the most democratic, most pro-Western, and most entrepreneurial, pro-capitalist party in the country. There is no other place in the world where you see that. And I think actually this is part of the reason why Turkey is getting to be such an interesting model for so many other countries, both in the immediate neighborhood and even further away. After the strategic relationships began to change, a particular moment happened that I think was a real turning point, and it was a moment that another moment that I predicted wrong. And that was the time when the United States went to the Turkish parliament and asked for permission to send our troops into Iraq through Turkey. At that time, the Turkish parliament had never said no to anything important that the United States asked. If there was resistance, it just took a few phone calls from military commanders to party leaders and everything would be dissolved. And I can still remember being interviewed, I hope that interview has been liquidated somewhere, and saying, in the end, of course Turkey is going to go along. That was my second bad prediction after Tayyip Erdogan has no future. As all of you know, the Turkish parliament did something it had never done before. It stood up and said, we are not going to cooperate with the United States. Now, 90% of the people of Turkey at that time were opposed to the American invasion of Iraq. So it wouldn't seem so shocking if it weren't for the fact that Turkey had never had a political system in which its majority could express itself before. It didn't matter what 90% of the people thought. And perhaps the most depressing and shocking episode that followed that was the visit of a senior American leader to Turkey, and in a public interview on television, he said that we were very disappointed the Turkish army did not stand up and play the role we hoped it would play. This was really a shameful thing, I thought. It was essentially saying, why isn't the military staging coups anymore? Why are they allowing democracy to take root in this country? And this is coming from a leader of the United States government. In any case, I think that moment in 2003 was a big turning point. That was the moment when Turkey began to think, we're on our own now. We're growing up. Turkey then set out on a fascinating project in the region. If I can just take you back for a moment to the period right after the Independence War in the 1920s, I think Ataturk made a very conscious decision to turn inward and not to have anything to do with the outside world. And there were at least a couple of reasons for this. One was Turkey was so backward, with no roads, no schools, no hospitals, that Ataturk realized we have so much to do at home, we have no business abroad. And secondly, he didn't want to promote the idea that we were trying to reestablish something like the Ottoman Empire. And that was the case for several generations. It was only after 2003 and the emergence of Tayyip Erdogan and his government that Turkey began to play this new role. And the Turks developed this foreign policy, which Foreign Minister Davutoglu famously dubbed zero problems with neighbors. Through this policy, he was able to make Turkey a regional leader. And Turkey established excellent relationships with almost all of its neighbors. Unfortunately, it's now become clear that when you live in a neighborhood like that, it's not possible to have zero problems with neighbors. You cannot be friendly with everybody in that part of the world. That wasn't clear for a while. It looked like that balancing act might happen, but perhaps inevitably that period came to an end. Now Turkey does have problems with some of its neighbors. So I'd like to talk a little bit about where Turkey is now domestically and also internationally. When the Erdogan government came to power, it had some spectacular successes. It had several years in which it broke through many of the barriers that had held Turkey back for so long. First of all, there were a series of dramatic democratic reforms enacted, including reforms that gave Kurds rights that they had never dreamed of before. And most importantly, the economy really began to boom. When I was living in Turkey during the 1990s, the average annual inflation rate was 75%. Now it's under 10. When I was living in Turkey, foreign direct investment was coming into Turkey on the rate of about $2 to $3 billion a year. Now it's $20 billion a year. This has produced an amazing jump in prosperity for the ordinary Turk. And one reason I think that Tayyip Erdogan remains so popular is there's living memory of economic collapse in Turkey. Now the economy is going so well, even people who have problems with some other aspects of the Erdogan regime are looking around and saying, you don't want to endanger this. This is not a given. This is not for sure. This is not guaranteed forever. We have this prosperity under this regime. Let's not endanger it. And I think that might be one of the principal foundations for Erdogan's continuing popularity. Erdogan was able to do this in part because of his own personality. He comes from a neighborhood in Istanbul, Kasımpaşa, which is a peculiar place. It's some people refer to it as a slum. I wouldn't call it that. It's a tough urban neighborhood. It's a place where people are famous for being very quick to fight, very easily offended, and have very prickly senses of honor. And he represents that to a T. Now, Erdogan is not the first figure in Turkish history to have emerged and won the admiration of great populations and been propelled to power that way. Actually, it's happened twice before. We saw this with the dramatic figure of Adnan Menderes in the 1950s, and then again, of course, with Turgut Özal in the 1980s. So I see Erdogan very much in that line. He's a figure who emerged from unpromising beginnings and managed to build a huge political movement. Comparing his party to other parties in Turkey, I think the main thing you can say is it is the only real political party in Turkey. The others have names, but there are a bunch of people sitting around in cafes. These parties are completely lost in the past, up to this very moment. They're still hoping that maybe the generals or the judges or the bureaucrats will help put them in power. There's no party other than Erdogan's party that really functions, that has people in every town, that goes knocking on doors, that has voting lists. This is the first and only modern party in Turkey. And in Erdogan, they have a figure who is quite charismatic. And actually, sometimes I think that the negative qualities of Erdogan, the ones I don't like, are ones that actually are the most important for Turks. I still remember sitting with my friend Kemal Dervish, who was finance minister for a while and then went on to become head of the UN Development Commission. And this was some years ago. He had political ambitions of a sort. And I remember telling him, you know, Kemal Bey, I don't think you're ever going to be prime minister of Turkey. And I'll tell you why. It's because you're the kind of person I would vote for. You're a sweetheart. You're such a nice guy. You don't want to yell at anybody. You don't bang on the table. You want to be friends with everyone. Turks don't like that. Turks want somebody who's tough. They want a hard hand. And this is known around the world. I'll tell you, I have friends in Afghanistan who told me when we had the first international security forces here, we pushed them around and walked all over them. When the Turks came, we went back into our houses and behaved. It's a reputation that precedes them, and Erdogan typifies this to a T. Now, after the first burst of hugely positive reform in Turkey, that government entered into another phase, and the reform process began to slow. Part of that had to do with resistance from the European Union to Turkey's ambitions to join, but also it marked an interesting transition, I think, in Erdogan's perspective, which is a change that I think you're seeing even more dramatically now. When he was on the outside, he was a great human rights advocate. He sounded like he was the chairman of the local Amnesty International committee, having himself been thrown in prison for a few weeks for something that he said in public. He took a very strong stand on the principles of democracy. Everybody should be allowed to say what they want to say. But now, he's got a different perspective, and I think how he would explain it would be something like this. What I really meant was people should be allowed to stand up and say the truth. I still believe that. But now the truth is what I'm saying. And I don't think there's any reason why other people should have the right to get up and say lies. So maybe we weren't quite hearing everything that Erdogan was saying, or maybe we heard what we wanted to hear. Or maybe he did make a bit of a transition once in office. Now, at this moment, Turkey is finding itself in a fascinating position, largely because of regional dynamics. One thing that's happened, I think, is that there is a huge jousting contest going on in the Middle East now between blocs that have been led traditionally by Iran and by Saudi Arabia. And these have proxies all throughout the Middle East. The United States, of course, is very strongly on one side. But both of these powers, Iran and Saudi Arabia, dream of becoming the next regional hegemon. However, something has changed in the world from the days of traditional hegemonic power. And it's this. In the old days, countries would submit to hegemonic power, one hegemonic power or another, simply by the whim of the dictator. Nasser wakes up one day and says he wants to be pro-American, then Egypt is in America's camp. He wakes up another day and says he's changed his mind, Egypt is now pro-Soviet. This doesn't happen anymore. In the modern world, it is possible for smaller countries to come under the umbrella of bigger countries, but only if the populations of those countries accept this. Now, in the Middle East today, there are very few people, not those people that are out there protesting in these democratic movements all across the region, who want to live like people in Saudi Arabia. And they also don't want to live like people in Iran. They don't want either of those hegemons. What they would really like to live like is people in Turkey. This is the reason why I think I heard once from President Gül, one of the best things we're doing for peace in the region is we just open our borders and let people come here. We don't have to tell them anything. Just walk around, see what we have, and then imagine how that could work back in your own country. In the meantime, Turkey has developed a mini industry of exporting soap operas. They've sent more than 70 soap operas around the Middle East, the Balkans, and even the wider world. And that is having a tremendous cultural influence. I've seen a Serb, a Croat, and a Muslim Bosnian sitting around, and the one thing they all agreed on was how much they were hoping that a certain woman in a certain soap opera was actually going to marry this guy and not that guy. That's the one thing they felt they were getting from Turkey. And that does also calm what have been some fears in the region about the rise of Turkish power. And when I first got to Turkey and had to print up my business cards, under my name, I was going to print Ottoman Empire correspondent. But I thought some people might not get the joke. So I decided Istanbul bureau chief would probably be just as good. I think there is some fear of this neo-Ottomanism. Nonetheless, given the alternative models, Turkey is in a very good position now. And it's no accident that Turkey has been opening up embassies in Africa and Central Asia and is active now in every part of the world. Now, I mentioned that Turkey went through kind of a second phase after the big burst of reform. That was a period when reform started to slow down. Now, with Erdogan having been overwhelmingly reelected to a third term and facing effectively no opposition, I think we're entering into another phase. And this is a phase where Erdogan's Kasim Pasha impulses, his authoritarian background, is starting to come back to the fore. One of the great things that happened in the early years of Erdogan was that the taboos that weighed down Turkish life for so long were wiped away. You could now say things about Kurds and Kurdish rights that would have been unthinkable even a few years earlier. The same thing had to do with Armenians. When I was living there, even in the 1990s, there was only one thing you could possibly say about Armenians and what happened in 1915. Now there are books and conferences and open discussions on these subjects that would have been unimaginable years earlier. Unfortunately, we're now in a period where new taboos are emerging. There are new things you're not supposed to talk too much about. One certainly is the wave of arrests that has sent quite some shock through the country. Many of the country's leading generals and prominent journalists and hundreds and hundreds of other people have been arrested on charges related to plotting coups against the government. Now, there's no doubt that the military has been involved in various plots to overthrow illegally the civilian regime. And it's great. It's a huge breakthrough for Turkey to see that the people who did that are being called to account. But many other people seem to be called to account as well. That net has been spread so widely that it's having a chilling effect on Turkish society. In addition, we've had the emergence of influence by this famous cleric who lives in the United States, or theologian, Fethullah Gulen. There are journalists in Turkey who have told me, I'm afraid to write about Fethullah Gulen now. I'm just not going to touch that subject. It's too dangerous. We hear reports that supporters of the Gulen movement are working to get into the police and the security forces. And in recent months, it seems quite clear that although they were quite closely allied with Erdogan for a while, that there are now clashes between them. So that's another taboo. The emergence of these taboos has been a disturbing sign. And the arrests about which one is not supposed to protest are also disturbing. In addition, there have been several aspects of Turkish foreign policy that have stalled. The obvious one is the European Union, and you can't blame the Turks for that one. But there are others. One is Cyprus. Cyprus is a nagging problem, and Cyprus, at least officially, is a big obstacle for the Turkish entry into the EU. That process is completely stalled. There is no imaginative thinking going on. There's no real diplomacy going on now. And that's going to be a block, a barrier for Turkey until it's solved. Second one is the Armenian problem. It's not going to go away. We were so close to resolving this problem at the end of 2009. We actually had an agreement signed between the two governments, which was signed in a wild night when Hillary Clinton was racing back and forth in Geneva from one hotel to another with police escorts to get people to change 2 words on one piece of paper. Finally, the accord was signed, and the essence of it was the border between Turkey and Armenia would be opened, and the question of the events of 1915 would be turned over to a panel of historians agreed upon by both sides. Unfortunately, nationalists on both sides torpedoed that. It was impossible for either side to have that treaty ratified. That accord embodied what we need to have, but it fell short. And I feel that although there's plenty of blame to go around on that one, if Turkey had done more, if Turkey had been more active, more determined to get it done, maybe it could have happened. And another big area where Turkey has suddenly found itself in trouble is Israel. Turkey has aspirations for regional leadership. Any regional leader of the Middle East has to be involved in an effort to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict. That is a prerequisite for regional leadership. Turkey was in a unique position to do that because Turkey was trusted by both sides. This was really in the interest of diplomacy, it was in the interest of peace, and it was in the interest of long-term regional security. Unfortunately, Tayyip Erdogan was not able to control his emotions on this issue. The provocations from Israel certainly were great, but it's the role of diplomats and statesmen not to allow themselves to be carried away by these provocations. Even those of us who might agree with Erdogan's views on Israel would not agree that these are good views for Tayyip Erdogan to have, or at least to act upon. Turkey is the only country in that region that had the ability to talk to both sides. Now it's lost the confidence of Israel. And I think this is another misstep for Turkey. Now, right in the most recent months, we're seeing Turkey very involved in the Arab Spring rebellions. And after a short misstep in Libya, Turkey has actually been very strongly in favor of Arab Spring movements, which, for example, Israel has not been. Turkey has more confidence that Islamic countries can produce some kind of democratic regime, and they want to use their own regime as an example. In fact, Tayyip Erdogan has been active in working with Islamic political parties throughout the Middle East and trying to make them more like his party. He even shocked some of his great supporters in Egypt by warning the Islamic Party not to be too radical, to move to the center, to understand that now you have a chance to come to power. You have to change the ideology that you had when you were sitting in the mosque and just dreaming. This is real now. And they were quite taken aback by this, although it did result in a huge headline in Al Aram saying, "Can you lend us Erdogan for a month?" I think it's very positive that Turkey has played this role, and I do fear, if I can digress for a moment, that there is going to be a problem of human rights clashing with democracy in some of these emerging countries. We're seeing it in Egypt, you're going to see it in Libya. More democracy may very well mean less human rights. I think the Erdogan government may be able to limit that with some of its influence on these parties, but the Erdogan government is also victim of that same syndrome. That the Erdogan government and Erdogan himself seem to have accepted completely the fundamental principle of democracy that the majority must rule. And that is a spectacular, historic breakthrough for Turkey. Has never happened before. But there's a secondary principle of democracy which you also must accept, and that is the majority must also respect the rights of everyone else in the country. As time goes on, there seems to be more and more reason to question whether Tayyip Erdogan and the people around him really accept that part of democracy. So if Erdogan wants to go out and preach to parties in other Islamic countries the value of combining human rights and democracy with religious belief, his own party would be a very good place to start. We are in something like a one-party system in Turkey, and we are in something like a one-man party. So it's an odd juxtaposition between that and the fact that Turkey has become so open and so free and actually so democratic. Some institutions are also holding Turkey back. I think two of the institutions that are furthest behind in Turkey are the press and the education system. These are two really weak links in Turkish society. The education system is still very old-fashioned. It depends on rote learning and repetition and memorization. It does not encourage creative thinking. Over the long run, this is very bad for a country that has the aspirations that Turkey has. As for the press, you are hearing a lot of protests now about journalists being put in prison, and I certainly sympathize with those protests. There is, however, a little bit of naivete, sometimes mixed with hypocrisy, in these protests. Because in the old days, in the pre-Erdogan days, the Turkish press was completely corrupted. It was run by giant conglomerates who used the press, used their newspapers, as ways to feed their own fortunes. If their auto company needed a big plot of land and the government wasn't giving them a good price on it, the next thing you know, the Minister of Industry would be accused of being a corrupt thug on the front pages of the newspaper. You just have to wait until you see headlines saying, "Minister cleared. He's actually totally innocent." Then you know, oh, they got the contract. The press was totally dishonorable in that period and never reported the truth of what was happening in Turkey, particularly in the southeast. So I share the discomfort of many outsiders at pressures that are emerging on the press right now in Turkey. But I'm not one of those who thinks that this is something new that Tayyip Erdogan invented. Turkey also has an institutional vacuum. Turkey doesn't have the institutional strength yet in its diplomatic corps or its other institutions to be a big global power. Holland has more diplomats than Turkey. Turkey has a long way to go, and diplomats don't get shaped overnight. So this is a long-term project. Nonetheless, there is in that part of the world what might be called a negotiation vacuum. There's no one doing that job anymore. It used to be the United States, but the United States has effectively lost interest in that project. There is a great opening for Turkey. But I do sense that Turkey's at a crossroads now. Signs of hubris are creeping into this government. And the authoritarian impulse seems to be growing stronger. This is something that happens to people when they're in power a long time. You can see them losing their consciousness as an outsider and thinking themselves more as defenders of power. This is an old story. It goes all the way from Martin Luther to Václav Havel. It has been repeated over and over again in history. Nonetheless, in Turkey, it's disturbing because the model that Turkey offers to the world, and particularly to its immediate neighborhood, is so valuable that anything that calls it into question in a serious way is going to have negative effects on the whole region. What I would like to see is a return to a situation in which Turkey would try to rebuild some of its relationships in that part of the world. I feel that Turkey still makes a good partner for the United States. The Obama administration has wisely adopted a policy that it calls compartmentalization toward Turkey. They always have these obscure phrases like dual containment. You have to wonder, what are they talking about? What it means is you do things we don't like, but we still realize that you're a good ally. So we won't complain about some of those other things. I actually think that's a wise policy. I believe the United States also needs to readjust its strategic relationships. One of the things I'd like to see the United States do is move out of its unilateralist mode and realize that we don't understand the Middle East completely. We need some kind of guides and friends in that part of the world. Who would those be? They should be countries that have societies that look something like ours. And they should have governments with which we feel more or less compatible. Our traditional allies, particularly Saudi Arabia, don't fit that view, don't fit that profile at all. Saudi Arabia does not make a logical long-term ally for the United States. Turkey does. In order, however, for this alliance to become fully functional, it has to be the kind of alliance that the United States is not used to having. And that's an alliance of equals. We're used to having alliances where we're the boss. If we can realize that the strategic environment has changed and that we need a good partner in that part of the world, I think Turkey would be the ideal partner. We've had some rough times with Turkey. I was in Istanbul when Prime Minister Erdogan and President Lula of Brazil were on their way to Iran a couple of years ago to see if they could negotiate a nuclear deal. And Erdogan actually played this very well. He was on his way, and then suddenly he announced it was all done in public so that Iran would get the message. He came on TV and said, "I've just heard that maybe the Iranians aren't ready to make a deal. That's it. I'm not going. I've canceled the trip." And then we heard about 8 hours later there were more contacts, and then Erdogan was gone. So he waved the stick, and the Iranians got the message. Sure enough, he came back with Lula, and they had the deal. And I'll tell you, Istanbul was jubilant. Not only had the Iranian nuclear crisis finally calmed down, but it was Turkey that played a big role in doing that. Well, that jubilation lasted about 6 hours until people in Washington woke up and told the Turks, "Oh, we don't like that deal." I think this was a big mistake. When we look back over the relations between the U.S. and Iran in the future, we'll see this as one of the biggest missed opportunities. The United States was right to say that that agreement was not complete, but we could have built on that. We could have said, there are a lot of holes in this, but this is positive. Let's see what we can get out of this. Brazil, being a little newer on the world stage than Turkey and maybe not so accustomed to diplomatic niceties, did something that the Turks would never do, which is they actually released on their website the letter from Obama to President Lula saying, "This is the deal we'd like you to get." And that was the same deal they got. The Turks were too nice to say that, but this certainly caused some friction on both sides. Nonetheless, there's no country in that part of the world that has long-term strategic interests that are as closely parallel to those of the United States, and at the same time, a government and society that looks something like ours. Now, that society still has old problems it needs to get over. There has always been a kind of anti-foreigner attitude in Turkey that almost sometimes borders on xenophobia. There's an aggressive nationalism in Turkey, which still informs society and to which political candidates play at election time. The Kurdish opening has completely expired now, and we're not back to the period before Erdogan, but we're pretty close to it. All the hopes that were raised by the legalization of the Kurdish language and other reforms are now being deflated. The situation in Syria presents very serious challenges to Turkey, and the Kurdish situation is one reason why. One reason it's so important for Turkey to resolve its Kurdish problem is that although Turkey does not face any imminent security threats, countries that want to make trouble in Turkey always know they have a way to do it. In the past, Israel has helped the PKK. In the past, Syria has given great help to the PKK. As long as this conflict goes on, Turkey will always be vulnerable to people meddling in there. It's very important for Turkey's security internationally that it resolve this problem domestically. And in Syria, you have this danger becoming very vivid. Syria has a big Kurdish population. With the relative independence of Kurds in Iraq and the surging nationalist feeling that has bound Kurds in Turkey together over the recent decades, something that is relatively new, actually, for the last couple of generations, you are seeing a new wedge created that could be a potential destabilizing factor inside Turkey. So Turkey has begun to slip back a little bit. Turkey has become more authoritarian than it was a few years ago. It's still far ahead of every other Muslim country in the neighborhood, and it's still far ahead of where it's been at any point in its history. It is still the most exciting place in the world, now for political and geostrategic reasons, instead of only for historical and culinary reasons. We are going to see this same government in power for an extended period. How this government is able to manage its power, how it is able to curb its apparent instinct for aggrandizement, how it is able to assimilate the true principles of democracy that we thought it was originally committed to, all of this is uncertain. And that creates another reason why it's a great place for journalists to go and a great place for other people to read about. It takes me back to that great Rumi line, "Everything that has been uttered is gone. It must be placed in the past. Now is the time to think of new things. Thank you.
That was splendid, Stephen. We have about half an hour for questions. Would you like to field the questions yourself? And who would like to begin? And we will ask you to use a microphone because we're recording the presentation as well as the questions and answer period. So please wait till you get a mic. Will? Coming from behind you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Am I on?
You won't be able to hear yourself, but you're being recorded.
Oh, okay.
That's just like those journalists in Turkey.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening talk. I was wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on the relationship, if there is one, between the Turkish economic miracle, I'll put in quotes, and the Islamic discourse regarding banking and capital. If there is one, I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Certainly, any country that follows traditional Sharia law on economics and banking is not going to be able to have the kind of economic success that Turkey has had. I think that this is something that this new class of Turks brought with them back from Europe. They began to think, I could still be a good Muslim and borrow money and lend money, take out mortgages. They developed a new synthesis. And that really is what modern Turkey is all about. It's about creating a new synthesis. I think also that this is going to be part of the influence that Turkey is going to have in the region. One thing Turkey's doing that's very important, and it's been a project of theirs over the last decade, is their institution building in the neighborhood. They're not just talking between foreign ministers. They're actually trying to change societies. And banking is one way to do this. So I think they are going to be working to build new economic institutions in other countries as well as other kinds of institutions. And this institution building idea is something that Foreign Minister Davutoglu is very strong about. I'll tell you one little story that reflects this. This was several years ago. I was in another one of those great drinking parties with these AKP guys where they're drinking tea and I'm chugging down the rake. He said to me, I was in Washington recently meeting with some very high officials of your government. I immediately said, who? Of course, being who he is, he said, I just said they were high officials of your government. Okay. And he said, I said to them, I want to ask you about Syria. You don't like what's going on in Syria. You don't like the regime in Syria. Now, we don't like the regime in Syria either. You'd like to see change in Syria. Yeah, we'd also like to see change in Syria. So we're on the same page. We want to be part of your project. What's your Syria project? I get a blank. We're going to kick Saddam. We're going to kick Assad. We're going to crush him. We're going to change him. We're going to have something new. Yeah, okay, well, what's the project, though? What are we going to do? And he said, I asked this question several times. It was obvious they had no project. And so I said to them, well, let me give you an idea. We have a project for Syria. We have a concept. Our concept is you want to create a strong middle class in Syria. That's what's going to produce democracy and stability over the long run. You need engagement with civil society. You need economic investment. You need contacts at every level of society. And that's a great long-term project that we should both become involved with. And he said, I could tell that I lost them when I mentioned the word long-term. This is something that Americans have a lot of trouble with. This is another reason why I'd like to see the United States listen a little more to Turkey and realize that a country that is always going to be there, that can't get away, does have an interest in long-term stability and security, and that includes economic institutions that are going to undergird that security.
Just following up on the economic question, to what extent do you think Turkey will be affected by the euro crisis and by the withdrawal of U.S. involvement in Afghanistan?
The euro crisis and what's happened in the European Union over the last couple of years has produced my Turkish isn't good enough to translate Schadenfreude into Turkish, but it certainly has produced a sense in Turkey that the tragedy of our not getting into the EU and not having the euro might not have been such a tragedy after all. They were always thinking, if we could have only had what Greece has. I don't think very many people in Turkey are thinking that now. One of my friends in Turkey was the former CEO of Turkish Airlines. And now he's on the board of the company that runs the airports in Turkey. And he told me, we were building our new airport in Istanbul at the same time the Greeks were building their new airport in Athens. Ours was a little bit bigger. But we both had relatively similar budgets and relatively similar schedules for getting it done. We got ours done under budget and a month early. Theirs took 4 times as long and cost 5 times as much. And he said, it's not because the Greeks are bad workers or poor administrators. It's just that they knew that every time they called up Brussels, they'd get more money. So why not call? He said, we had a discipline. It was impossible. We didn't have anybody we could call. I thought of that as just a kind of a cute anecdote, but now I realize it's much more profound than that. That's a story that really tells you something that went very wrong in Greece and went very wrong in Europe and went very wrong in the European Union. The possibility of Turkey buying a few of those islands or taking over the Acropolis and putting the crescent and star flag over there might be a little too extreme. Nonetheless, I do think that Turkey is grateful that it's outside this crisis. Turkey's economy is still booming. There are some signs of overheating out there, and I hope they're going to pay attention to that. You don't want them to get the overconfidence economically that they seem to have politically. As for Afghanistan, Turkey considers itself a regional leader, and it definitely considers Afghanistan part of its region. And that is a long relationship. You know that Ataturk personally was an inspiration for the king of Afghanistan back in the 1920s, who was quite a reformer. He was a believer in women's education and other kinds of reforms. And he specifically said that he was doing this at the inspiration of Ataturk. So this is not a new relationship. Afghanistan also, of course, not an Arab country, but a Muslim country. And I think the Turks also fully realize, as some of us outsiders do, that the extreme form of Islam that you see practiced in Afghanistan is not native to Afghanistan. That has been brought to Afghanistan by people that we paid to bring it there. So there is a potential in Afghanistan for, I think, a very strong relationship with Turkey, a non-Arab Muslim country. Nonetheless, the question of instability in Afghanistan can only be resolved on a regional basis. This is why I think the American project there, as it's presently constituted, is not going to work. All the countries in the neighborhood have an interest in stability in Afghanistan. The way for us to withdraw from Afghanistan without seeing it immolated is to withdraw in concert with the nations in the neighborhood. But that requires us not to do the things that we want to do. We have to do the things that everyone agrees on. It's also a big problem because one of the countries in the neighborhood that has a great ability to influence success or failure in Afghanistan is Iran. We would have to include Iran at this table. This is something I think the Turks would encourage. The Turks also practice compartmentalization. They are concerned about the nuclear program in Iran, but they realize there's not going to be any stability in that part of the world as long as Iran is always pushed outside and hectored and pushed into a corner and not brought into regional security arrangements. So I think the role for Turkey could be to help promote the regional solution, which I think is the only way for the United States to withdraw peacefully from Afghanistan. But the United States is not ready for that yet. If we are, I think Turkey can play a big role. And this is one area where Turkey has made offers to the United States. I hope the United States takes them. I think we are starting to work with Turkey on the Syria problem. Turkey is being very cautious, and I think wisely so. The United States and some crazy senators are floating these ideas about arming the Syrian so-called opposition, or even promoting the Turks to build safe havens even inside Syria and then defending them. This is an instant way to involve Turkey in a civil war in Syria. So far, Turkey is wisely resisting those. So I hope that America's interest in consulting Turkey on the Syria issue could spill over, and it could be a bridge for us to listen more carefully to Turkey on other regional issues, including Afghanistan. Uh-huh.
Thank you, Professor. You had mentioned that Turkey was an important player in the potential peace process between Israel and the Palestinians because it was a very trusted player. I was wondering if you could tell us more about Israel and Turkey's relationship, both regarding the peace process and maybe trade, immigration, whatever you feel like talking. And if you could divide it before and after the Flotilla crisis, and how do the Turks feel, beyond the political and the diplomatic? The Turks, the people, how do they feel? Thank you.
Interesting. Turkey and Israel have had a long and very curious relationship. I think it would fit into a larger pattern, and that is the non-Muslim countries in the Middle East, or sorry, the non-Arab countries in the Middle East feeling some kind of solidarity. You saw it with the relationships between the Shahs, Iran, and Turkey, even with the mullahs, Iran and Turkey for a while. And Israel was a part of that. So there was a strategic reason for cooperation, and it was enforced really from Washington. It was Washington's idea that Turkey and Israel should be friends. And we were able to influence both of them, and we brought them together. As they were brought together, they found a number of common interests. Don't forget, this was the period when the military was the final word in Turkey, and there were considerable number of military projects in common. The Israelis modernized whole fleets of Turkish tanks and Turkish jet fighters. In exchange, Turkey gave Israel something that it really needs, which is airspace. Israel relies a great deal on its air force power, but it doesn't have any room to practice. Turkey gave them the rights to practice all their maneuvers over Turkish soil. That went on for years and years, and that was very valuable. And it was not an accident that all during this period, whenever Turkey got in trouble in Washington, it has no presence in Washington, or had no presence in Washington at all, the Israelis would come to their aid. And this produced this kind of odd and to some people uncomfortable situation of the Armenians demanding Congress denounce Turkey for the Holocaust of 1915, and the Israelis telling them, don't do that. Don't denounce them. Don't go on the Armenian side. So that was how close the relationship was. There was even talk while I was living there in the 90s of a water pipeline. Turkey is water rich. Turkey has huge amounts of water, and that's not so common in that part of the world. And as you know, Israel is very water poor. I was there when an Israeli minister was brought down to the mouth of one of the Turkish rivers as it empties into the Mediterranean. And he almost had a cardiac arrest as he saw these huge cascades of fresh water just going into the Mediterranean. Stop that water, bring it to us, we need it. So there was a considerable basis for cooperation. At the time when the military was in power, when the United States was the dominant force, and when public opinion didn't really play a role in politics. I get the sense, even to this day, that there's not tremendous anti-Israel feeling, or even certainly not anti-Semitism in Turkey. Nonetheless, the West Bank project and the Gaza project particularly have had a tremendous impact on the minds of ordinary Turks. It's hard to communicate, but when you live in that part of the world and you are seeing every day on TV, every little act, when one Israeli soldier hits a kid on the head with a rifle butt, this is replayed 100 times on Turkish television. It's over and over. It's in your face all the time. You can't get away from it. And this has, I think, caused a big movement of Turkish public opinion. When Tayyip Erdogan had his famous blow-up at Davos and yelled at the president of Israel and said he was finished with Davos forever, that was the only time that when he arrived back home from a diplomatic trip, there were spontaneous crowds of thousands waiting for him at the airport. And I think that was really the beginning of his celebrity status. That's when he got to be a rock star in the Middle East. It was that moment. And then, of course, the Mavi Marmara crisis emerged. That was another one that should have been able to be resolved. You know, as you remember, the Turks demanded an apology. And the Israelis said, well, they could do a lot, but they couldn't apologize. It's the job of diplomats and interpreters and translators trained in diplomacy to find a word that means apology in Turkish, but doesn't mean apology in Hebrew. They were not able to do that. Maybe there wasn't really the political will on either side. There got to a moment where both sides were fed up with each other and just said, drop dead. I think in a way it was partly personal, also with Tayyip Erdogan. A lot is. He had spent 8 hours in a dinner with Ehud Barak, talking about how they were going to resolve the Syria problem, and then a couple of days later he woke up and saw that Gaza was being invaded. As far as he was concerned, it was all personal. That was a personal insult to him. That's why the Israelis did it. And that's the Qasim Pasha boy coming back into his mind. There's been tremendous stubbornness on both sides. I think this relationship has become quite badly frayed. Nonetheless, if we can pull back from emotion, maybe I should just stop there because that's so unrealistic. If we could pull back from emotion on both sides, the strategic logic of a good Israel-Turkey relationship is still there. Turkey depends on and realizes that it depends on regional stability above all. If you go anywhere in Jordan or Libya or Iraq now, you are seeing Turkish construction companies working everywhere. It used to be just Kazakhstan. Now they are all over the Middle East. As long as the Middle East is stable or relatively stable, the Turks will get richer and richer. If there's upheaval in the Middle East, that's not going to happen. And the number one driver of instability in the Middle East is the Arab-Palestinian, as Arab-Israeli conflict. Therefore, it's very much in Turkey's interest to get this relationship back on track. I think it might take a little more time. I lament where that relationship is. And it's one of the steps that I think Turkey is going to have to take in order to reach the place where it needs to get to. There's a few hurdles that Turkey needs to leap over in order to get to the world power status that it wants to get to. The Kurds are definitely one. The hostility with Israel, I believe, is another. Turkey's in a difficult neighborhood, but Turkey also picks fights sometimes. Sometimes you have to fight, but you can avoid some of them. And Erdogan is not the kind of guy who likes to run away from a fight. This last year, in 2011, Turkey passed Vladimir Putin's Russia in the number of cases at the European Human Rights Court in Strasbourg. This is not the place where Turkey wants to be. Turkey needs to put some of these issues behind it. And I think that the Turkish population could be ready with a certain partner on the other side in Israel to move past this anger it's feeling now. I don't think the population is resolutely and permanently anti-Israel. It would require substantial changes in Israeli policy, but possibly there are those in Israel also who would recognize that that would be good for Israel as well. If Israel can change, Turkey can change. If they can change together and in stages, if they can somehow find a way to sit back down, I think they can begin a process that would be greatly beneficial to both of them and to the region. Right here.
Considering Turkey's rise to power, do you see their defense policy in the future being an important NATO ally still, or do you think that they're going to adopt a more unilateral defense policy with their new advances?
I think Turkey will remain a strong NATO ally, but I don't think that's going to be so important anymore. NATO ran the world, but what's NATO now? NATO's doing these kind of borderless humanitarian missions and it's trying to figure out what it wants to be and where it wants to go, what it wants to do. So being a strong pillar of NATO meant a lot at one time. Now they're still a strong pillar, but of what? I think NATO's caught some of the disease that the European Union has, which is identity crisis. I don't think that Turkey is going to act unilaterally because Turkey has seen the benefits of multilateralism. Many countries want to work with Turkey and they want to accept Turkey's guidance. Of course, every country likes to work with countries like that. So although I see Turkey shifting its emphasis away from Europe for obvious reasons, I don't see Turkey as becoming a destabilizing security or defense factor. The Turks have always been able to think strategically, including in a geopolitical sense, and I don't think that's changed with this government. Right here? Brigitte?
I really liked your vision of the U.S. Seeking Turkey as an ally in that region. Do you see that looking into November, if there was a change in government? Do you still see that as a possibility?
Well, first of all, I find it very interesting that despite the fact that Turkey's had this very public and ugly break with Israel, that Turkey has had problems throwing journalists in jail, and it's had bad press in a number of ways in recent months, this has not shaken the Turkey-U.S. relationship. It hasn't really had an impact in the United States. So I think there is definitely the prospect for an intensification of this relationship. I saw that President Obama remarked in an interview with Fareed Zakaria that there were 4 foreign leaders he really admired, and he mentioned Tayyip Erdogan as one of them. They talk on the phone about once a month over the last year or so. I believe that Obama definitely appreciates what Turkey is, and the fact that he made his first overseas visit there, made his first speech there, certainly speaks volumes. So I do think that President Obama is eager to intensify that relationship. I know that Mitt Romney has among his advisors a guy who's a former U.S. ambassador to Turkey. This guy's turned very anti-Turkish in his old age, and I don't know what that will mean if there's a change in administration. Nonetheless, in foreign and strategic policy, realism often takes hold in Washington. The one time when it doesn't take hold is when it has to do with Israel. And I think the number one driver of the outbreak of frenzy against Iran in the United States now is coming from Israel. And I think, conversely, if Israel were somehow to decide that Iran is okay and we don't have a problem with them, the whole frenzy in the United States would deflate overnight. I don't feel that there's a constituency in the United States for breaking with Turkey. On the other hand, if Israel decided to mobilize in ways that it has not yet and try to use its power in Washington to break the U.S. relationship with Turkey, that probably wouldn't work under an Obama administration, but it might work under a Republican administration. That would be very troubling.
There's a lot of talk following the Arab Spring in various countries in the Middle East about following the quote-unquote Turkish method, or the way that, Ataturk after 24. And I'm curious, to what extent do you think that is a feasible goal for some of these countries, given the last few decades of reform and that sort of history preceding World War I that facilitated the transition to a very modern and very aggressive modernization under Ataturk? And second part, to what extent do you think those people elsewhere in other countries in the Middle East have a realistic understanding of what they mean by the Turkish model, and whether it's sort of their love for Erdogan's fight at Davos, or whether it's an understanding of what democratic institutions are talking about?
Well, first of all, let me answer the second part. I do think that many people in the Arab world have a pretty good understanding of what is Turkey and why Turkey succeeds. And that is one of the most encouraging facts of Middle Eastern life today. As to the applicability of the Turkish model, this is a more complicated question. If I have to say yes or no, I don't like to do that, but I would say no. It took Turkey 100 years to get here. It might not take 100 years now, but you cannot do this overnight. Democracy is not just an election. Democracy is a whole way of dealing with life's problems. It takes generations to assimilate it. You cannot instill this in people overnight. It has nothing to do with how good or bad you are as a nation or an individual. It is a huge cultural sea change. I think Turkey can help guide, and Turkey can be an inspiration. We can dream. Certainly, it's the best possible outcome for any of these countries that are now in upheaval in the Muslim Middle East, that they would end up being something like Turkey. But I don't think that's realistic over the short to medium term. Even 20 years ago, Turkey was still under a heavy authoritarian grip and was on the brink of constant economic collapses. So Turkey's emergence as the model that everybody wants to imitate has taken a very, very long time. You can't leap to that stage right away. You said, how about, would they like to follow the Ataturk model? Yeah, the Ataturk model is some decades of dictatorship until we feel that we can let you out and play on your own. I hope it won't take that long, but certainly Ataturk would never have told you that in 1925 we should have a referendum on, do you want to abolish the caliphate? Would you like to have women go to school? Would you like to change the alphabet? Would you like to ban Sharia law? He knew what he had to do. How you adapt that to the modern age, I don't know, but I fear that overconfidence in the brilliant promises of democracy and the sense that they can be achieved by the waving of a wand or the signing of a constitution is very dangerous in the Middle East because it is going to produce a tremendous letdown that can have great backlash. Biren.
I want to ask if there is also a personal element in Erdogan's relationship with the Assad regime, and whether that this personal element clashes with what you would consider strategic interests.
Well, by the fact that you asked that question, I think you probably know the answer. There's no doubt about it. In fact, there's probably no international relationship that Turkey's intensely involved in that is so personal as this one. Foreign Minister Davutoglu made something like 60 trips to Syria. They talked about Syrians as their brothers. They abolished the visa restrictions. You could just walk in and walk out anytime you wanted. They were practically uniting. It was the greatest love fest Turkey has ever been involved with in its own neighborhood. Tayyip Erdogan would have Assad at his weekend home on the Aegean to sit around and drink and smoke and have fun and talk about the world for days and days on end. They're sitting there in their bathing suits and talking about how they're going to change their countries. And when trouble started in Syria, Erdogan called up his old friend and said, let me give you a couple of pointers. And effectively, Assad said, drop dead, and he hung up the phone. You don't do this to a guy from Qasim Pasha. I think it is personal with him. I spent so much time with that guy. He was lying to me the whole time. He stood right here and told me X, Y, Z, and now look what he's doing. The intensity with which Turkey has begun to denounce the Assad regime, I think stems at least in part from a sense of personal betrayal on the part of somebody who is easily betrayed and easily angered. It's not a good way to shape foreign policy. Emotion is always the enemy of wise statecraft.
What do we know?
Did you get a microphone?
Thank you. What do we know about President Gül's relationship to Gülenism, if any? And what do we know about President Erdogan's health?
Interesting questions. Well, Gül and Gülen, of course, are quite different figures. I've known Abdullah Gül quite well over a long period of time. Erdogan I've met and interviewed, but we only really have a professional relationship. But Gül is a very different kind of a figure. Tayyip Erdogan is tall and rough. He's like a soccer player. He's the guy that would kick your shins. Gül is short and squat. He's more like a wrestler, a guy who, if you're really big, will know how to use your strength against you. He's a sweetheart. He really is a nice guy. He lived, as you know, for a number of years in Jeddah, working for the Islamic Development Bank. He is often reported to have stronger ties to the Gulen movement than Erdogan does. I think the Gulen movement is a big factor in Turkish life, but I can't get my hands on it. I can't wrap my mind around it. I don't know where it is. I can't find it. I think it's there. A lot of my Turkish friends say the same thing. So what exactly is the relationship between President Gül and that movement? I wouldn't even dare to speculate. As for Erdogan's health, it's also a difficult one. He's not in as bad shape as Chavez, but he was hospitalized, as you know, a couple of times recently. The question of the future leadership of Turkey is quite intriguing. Everybody in Turkey agrees that the military constitution that was placed in power and put in place in 1983, when the military left, is repressive, and backwards, and needs not to be amended but abolished. Human rights groups and progressives and those who wanted to see all kinds of guarantees in the Constitution were very excited about this. So was everybody in Turkey. But after a while, it started to become clear that the enthusiasm of the Erdogan government for a new constitution had some other bases. And part of it was to change the political system to one in which the president would have more power than the prime minister, and then would allow prime ministers to run for president for 2 terms, which of course was tailor-made for Tayyip Erdogan, who, in moments of weakness or candor, has made clear that he would love to be in power in 2023 on the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the Republic of Turkey. This is a little bit disturbing. There's been this talk then that the whole constitutional reform project is going to be hijacked by people who want to keep Erdogan in power, which is essentially Erdogan himself. And that has caused many other people to lose enthusiasm for that project. I can tell you one figure who is emerging from a very puzzling background to have become a real favorite in Turkey is Foreign Minister Davutoglu. Of course, I love the idea that a soft-spoken academic could become a wildly popular figure to all of his countrymen. And he has managed to accomplish this by showing great political as well as diplomatic skills. He is a pious Muslim, so conservatives like him. On the other hand, he's a great promoter of development in the third world, so liberals like him. He has quite a base of support. He is also not a shouter. He's a conciliator. So there is a bench there. Ali Babacan is another young figure who was just here in Boston this week. There are others out there. We have no indication that Tayyip Erdogan is truly ill, but you would certainly hate to think that a development of this geopolitical importance as the emergence of Turkey would rise or fall depending on the health of one individual. And I don't think it will.
I want to thank our speaker really for a terrific talk. I'm tempted to go on, but I have 2 incentives to close the session. One is that I'm thinking if we close it now, we can do another one and scalp tickets and make a lot of money. This has been terrific. But also we have a reception. And I'm not sure that we have an Iraqi on order, but I think we probably have some functional equivalent. But before adjourning to the informal part of the program, please join me in thanking our speaker, who's really given us a first-rate presentation and great and thoughtful answers to some hardball questions. So thank you very much.